again, here we are talking adding integers. This is topic 4-2. So please let's make sure that we have our notes out ready to go and our calculators put away. We are not using calculators on this topic. And since we're going to be allowed to use one on the test, you really should be practicing these questions without the use of a calculator yourself. If you would like to, at the end, check your answers with a calculator, that's fine, just so that you have your instant feedback, but please do not use a calculator. The launch here, some of you probably recognize this question from last year. It's hard to forget the zombie pretzel attack 2. So if you could go ahead, take a look at that one, pause the video. Okay, so I had that player 1 had 500, player 2 had negative 100, and player 3 had 100. I think that when it comes to the adding integers, people, when they have a story behind the numbers, it's easier for you to understand what's happening, why we're adding, why we're subtracting, why they're negative, and why they're positive. Next, we're going to go to the T-concept video that is in digits. Oh my God, hold on. Here, that's fine. You should recognize this from last year, that they talked about that you can use a number line model to compare adding positive and negative numbers to 3. They're specifying 3 here as the number that they want to add to. So they're imagining that you are walking along the number line facing the positive direction. I want you to notice that they've started at 0. They always start at 0 and then they move along to 3. I don't know why they don't just put a dot at 3 and say start, but they want you to recognize that since we're going to 3, that's a positive, so we moved to the right. As a reference again, integers are whole numbers, they're positive numbers, and then they can be their opposites, the negatives. There are no fractions or decimals so far, just positive and negatives. So what they're showing us here is that if you have 3 plus n, when n is 5, you would move forward if n is positive. And their drawing of a cube, and it's about as approximate how I would draw. So they're showing here with another line, a little bit higher than the blue line, that they moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. They didn't end at 5, they moved 5 spaces, so right now they're at 8. Then they're going to turn around and show, if we were to do 3 plus negative 5, 3 plus negative 5, again I said that the negative sign tells you a direction. Don't just think about it being a negative amount, it's a direction. On a number line, the direction means it to the left. So that means you would move backwards n when it's negative. So if it's negative 5, this time I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the distance that I moved is the same, 1 in the positive direction to the right, 1 in the negative direction towards the left. This time I ended up at negative 2. And again, they're just going to specify here that the distance from 3 for both of them was the same. Pretty much exactly what I just said. Okay? Back to the notes. So number 1 is asking us, suppose you received $10 from your grandma. Oh, thanks, Grandma, you shouldn't have. You get $10 from your grandmother for your birthday. You spent $4 on snacks. Using addition, how would you write an equation to represent the situation? So I'm just going to be clear here. This is wrong. That's not what we're looking for here. So go ahead and rewrite that as addition. And I'm saying to myself, well, if I spent $4, that means I'm getting rid of the $4, so I would be moving to the left on the number line, so 10 plus negative 4. I like to put parentheses around my negative signs just to keep them safe so you don't confuse them with subtraction signs. It would not be incorrect if you were to write it like this, with the negative up a little bit higher on the 4. How would you model your equation on a number line? Well, I would say, okay, I'm going to go at the 0, just like we did with our models. If we go back and look at what he did, remember they started at the 0. And I'm going to move to the right 10 because I'm talking about going positive. So I know that I'm ending at the 10. So I'm going to go to the right 10. And then plus negative 4, that means the direction that I'll be moving is to the left. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, which ends me at the 6. I'm following the flow of the arrows. So you want to put these lines a little bit higher so you can follow where you're going. So number 2, again, these are just more practice problems. The number line is really a great reference for you to keep going back to so that you can understand when I'm moving to the left, when I'm moving to the right. When is my answer going to be positive? When is it going to be negative? So give those 6 questions a try. Pause the video. Check over your answers. So again, 5 plus 3, if I had asked you that question on the first day of school, you all, of course, would have been able to say that it was 8. When I'm thinking about 5 plus negative 9, if I'm at the number line at 5, so I'm putting a dot at 5, and I have plus negative 9, that means I'm actually moving to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I end up at negative 4. So that's how I would use the number line to help myself. Okay, check over the rest of your answers. And then we're moving on to another vocabulary here that says the sum of a number and its opposite is 0. Opposite, off, on, up, down, white, black. Opposite is 0. 2 numbers that have a sum of 0 are called additive inverses. This is yet another vocabulary word we need to focus on. The inverse property of addition states that every number has an additive inverse. The sum of a number and its additive inverse is 0. Well, I don't know if I quite believe that every number has an additive inverse, because I can think of one in particular, 0, who would not have an additive inverse. So all numbers except for 0 really have an additive inverse. What they are doing is showing us with arithmetic. Arithmetic means with numbers, and algebra showing us with letters. So arithmetic, 5 plus negative 5 is 0, negative 5 plus 5 is 0. Or for any number A plus negative A would be 0, negative A plus A would also be 0. On the back, go ahead, you can pause the video. We're going to work on circling which ones of those show additive inverses. I chose 5 of those that have additive inverses. Just be careful, the numbers need to be opposites of each other, so that's why negative 12 plus negative 12 are not opposites. Number 4 says you're playing a card game with your friends. The cards have integers on them for values. David drew 3 cards, negative 6, 12, and negative 4. So what is the sum of the cards in his hands? Sum means that we're going to add. So if I had negative 6, plus 12, plus negative 4, I could model this on the number line for myself, even informally, even if I wasn't going to be drawing all the lines. So if I know that I'm going to be starting off at negative 6, I'm going to go negative 6 plus 12. Plus 12 means I'd be moving to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Lands me at 6. Plus negative 4 would now mean that I'm moving 4 to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, which lands me at 2. Okay, so the purpose of the number lines there is really for you to just have as a reference point right now. Go ahead, look at number 5, pause the video. You can see my number line representation got a little out of hand because I was adding 4 numbers together, but it makes sense to me that if I start at 0, I move to the right 2, then I counted over right 8 spaces, then I went back to the left 11 spaces, and then I'm showing in another color red that I added the remaining 7, and it actually brought me to 6. Notice I'm not using any rules here. I'm just really trying to use the visuals to help me. Number 6 says what card would you need to pick in order to get back to 0? So if we were at 6, I would need to get back to 0. I would have to probably pick a negative 6. And my reasoning would say you would have to pick a negative 6 because negative 6 is the additive inverse to 6. So you would want, or you would need, to pick a 6, negative 6, because negative 6 is the additive inverse to 6. Number 7 says, is the value of 52 plus negative 52 greater than 0, less than 0, or equal to 0? Well, 52 and negative 52 are additive inverses, so that would mean that if I was to add them together, they would be equal to 0. Then for number 8, I'm just going to change the wording on this one a little bit because I want to be clear. I'm not a football person myself, so I can kind of read it a little bit wrong. It says, if a football player gains 40 yards on a play, but on the next play loses 10 yards, what would his total yards be for the game if he ran for another 60 yards? So, in my mind, since we talked about how distance is never really a negative number, if I'm running forward 40 yards and I'm running around backwards 10 yards, in my mind, I ran a total of 50 yards. But when we talk about the game of football, that's all and good. The goal is to get to the end, and if they keep getting pushed back, they're not going to be able to get there. So instead of saying, what would his total yards be for the game, I'm just going to change this to, how many yards did he gain? And I discussed this with your peers to make sure that we're on the right path here. So if a football player gains 40 yards on a play, but on the next play loses 10 yards, how many yards did he gain for the game if he ran for another 60 yards? So we start off at 0. I'm going to say that each of these are 10. 90. And since we don't really have negative values in football, let's just go with this. So we start off at 0. He's going to gain 40 yards, so we go to 40. He then loses 10, so I'm going to go back to the left. And then he's going to run for another 60. So that means I'd be going back towards the right, and that would end me at 90. So I'm getting, how many yards did he gain? 90 yards. The final step here, it says rules for adding integers. Come up with your own rules for adding integers. Make sure it works for all possible situations, and write the rules here. We will discuss this in class tomorrow. The homework will be relatively quick tomorrow, the practice 4-2, so we will have lots of time for discussion. Thanks, we'll see you tomorrow.